Okay, this is certainly one of the crazier things I've ever done in my life. I'm sitting here alone in a room with a machine, and I'm teaching a guitar lesson to the machine. I'd like to build up a library of concepts that you could use to advise people who are having technical difficulties on guitar. And I thought I'd start with some of the easier things that are very simple to teach and might be perceivable through a format like this. I wish I had someone to work the camera and shoot this at different angles, but I'll try and do it all in one piece here. The principal difficulties people get into in the left hand have to do with 2 or 3 categories of muscles that they might be misusing or not taking advantage of, and a couple of mistaken perceptions about how the left hand works. So, the first thing to define is kind of ironic. You would think I should define everything about how the shoulder and arm work, and I will get to that, but the first thing to remember for most accomplished players who are getting the usual kind of carpal tunnel problem that people describe in the left hand on guitar and are being advised to get the retiniculum extensoris clipped and so on and so forth. The usual thing to say about that for me is to observe that they have never been told anything about the muscles which control the lateral motion of their fingers. And by taking control of and learning to balance those muscles, they could so improve their leverage and the balance of their whole left arm eventually that they could avoid the necessity for that kind of operation or the extensive therapies people recommend for that sort of thing. Most of the therapies like that operation are designed to make you tolerate more of a motion you don't need in the first place. The basic irony of early guitar study is that you are told you must stretch your fingers apart, and you see that it's necessary to stretch on the neck of the guitar. And as you first perceive the command to stretch on the neck, you begin a grave mistake that is compounded in later technique. When I look at my hand, and intuitively when I say stretch, I'm going to move my hand like that. That involves a group of muscles that are basically on the dorsal side of the hand, and they are called abductors. Any motion away from the center line of the middle finger is said to be abduction, or moving away from center. If you try a little test, if you press against your index finger and press out, you can see or even feel the muscle right here distending. That is the muscle that pulls the index finger outward. Likewise, you can see and feel the one that's on the outside of the little finger pulling it outward. The muscles that pull the other fingers outward aren't perceivable from the surface. They're deep down between the bones of the hand. But there's one in here, in this compartment between these 2 fingers, that pulls the ring finger outward. And there are 2 that pull the middle finger back and forth. The method of definition, the nomenclature they use, is that either one of those is an abductor, because either one of those muscles pulls the middle finger away from that imaginary center line. We overuse those on guitar. We say stretch constantly. The muscles which pull the fingers back towards center, that center, are called adductive muscles, and they're basically in the palm of the hand, although they're deep in the palm, and again, you can't see them easily on the surface. There's one here which pulls the index finger in toward the middle. There's another here which pulls the ring finger in toward the middle, and still another down in there which pulls the little finger in toward the middle. Those are the ones that are habitually underdeveloped in guitarists. and many string players. And basically the reason for that is because we don't think of the command squeeze as a necessary thing when we're trying to stretch on the guitar. So here then is the irony. I wish I could get a close-up of this, but basically if I say stretch to my fingers when they are straight out like this, that does move their tips apart. If on the other hand I bend my fingers like that, as you do on the guitar, and then I say stretch, that tends not to move the tips apart anymore, it jams them together. If I give the command stretch to the second and third fingers, it pushes the tips closer together. Ironically, if I say to these fingers squeeze, it pushes the tips a little bit apart. Many times on the neck of the instrument, that is a necessary balance to learn, when to say stretch and when to say squeeze. And we say stretch too often and squeeze not often enough. I'm going to demonstrate this to a couple of other people and try and send a few different tapes, but basically when I am looking down at the neck from above, I see a view that looks like this, and if I am trying to place my fingers, say my second and fourth fingers, which are a typical problem for guitarists, if I try to place them a whole tone apart, and I believe that to be very difficult to do, I will say stretch to those two fingers, and their tips will get jammed sort of toward one another that way. If on the other hand, you can see where my second finger is, if I say squeeze to the second finger, the tip goes back quite a bit, and I'm able to sort of shift forward toward the fret like that. Then I say squeeze to my fourth finger, and I can aim it out at the fret and much more easily get a whole tone. It's not hard to do it this way, but on the neck, if you can view it from above, as you experiment with it, you can see that by using the adductive muscles, you can actually get a very good grip on the neck and more distance between the fingertips. When you abduct two fingers on the neck, like that, with second and third, there's a tremendous amount of stress on the back of the hand here. And that usually is the sort of thing that leads to the diagnosis of carpal tunnel syndrome. In fact, it is simply not necessary. It is counterproductive to jam the fingers apart like that. If you are holding a simple chord like this and find yourself stretching fingers apart like that, it's actually not doing a very good job of pressing down the strings. You're not coming straight into the tips of the fingers, but rather you're pushing along the surface of the string. And much of your energy is either going down this way or up that way along the string. And friction along the string, you're expending most of your energy. If you can squeeze the fingers toward one another, you actually can bear more weight from your arm, which is the basic way you play. I should spend more time on that in a few moments, about the weight of the arm doing most of the work. But adduction is the principal exercise that one has to do to get away from the kinds of problems we have with the back of the left hand. I have a series of exercises that deal with that. Exercises for adduction. Quite simply, it is very unlikely that anyone could overdo the exercise of the adductive muscles. Why? Well, if you try to abduct the fingers a tremendous amount, you begin to tear tissue between the fingers, and you put a lot of twist or torque, a lot of turning force on the fingers. You're tilting them and twisting them. And there's an infinite amount you can twist them outward. You can just twist them outward and keep twisting them until you hurt yourself. Whereas in adduction, there's a finite amount you can squeeze together. You squeeze until you run into the finger adjacent, and then you can't squeeze any further. So it's hard to overdo adduction. With that in mind, I can advise you to attempt a fairly extensive program of adduction, and you can learn how to do it in a fairly safe way, even if no one is there to watch you and monitor every little bit of work. For instance, I can ask you to hang your hand and shoulder and arm very loosely, using the weight of your arm on the neck, leaving your arm and shoulder very loose, hanging down right below wherever you are on the neck. And then put your second and fourth fingers, these two fingers, on the sixth string, 1 fret apart. That's only a half step. Usually I'll ask you to do that in the middle of the neck. I've observed that almost everyone plays with a pretty good hand position in the left hand if they play the base side of the neck in the middle of the neck somewhere. Most of us start to twist wildly when we get to the first position, and we start to hook awfully when we get to the treble side of the instrument. Ironically, because of our training, we have the most trouble playing the simplest part of the instrument. That again has to do sometimes with our early training being taught to play the notes E, F, and G, 1 and 3 when we're not ready to do it, as opposed to 1 and 4, which is the way it was always taught in previous centuries, and would line up and balance our hand comparatively well. Now, I ask you to put 2 and 4 here with a relaxed arm and adduct them. You can see me doing that. I'm going to move these 2 knuckles toward each other. In fact, the fourth finger is going to get squeezed a little bit underneath the third finger here. I will move to a new string and then squeeze again for a few seconds, and then move to a new string and squeeze again. It's very important that exercises always move to the new string for each attempt or for every few attempts after a few seconds. You should not attempt to do this squeezing on the same fret on the same string many times in a row. Each time you move to the new string, your arm shifts down slightly, and you try and do this squeezing or adduction. If I were viewing my hand from the ceiling, I would see that my fingers, when I adduct, my fingertips are kind of lined up perpendicular to the plane of the fingerboard. If I held my hand like this, you can see that I'm sort of pressing down straight into the fingerboard now, rather than pressing at an angle like this. Now, once I've completed a cycle of those squeezes, squeezing for a few seconds and relaxing for a few seconds on, say, the 6th fret where I am now, I can go down to a slightly bigger fret, slightly further away from the center of my body, and squeeze there. One way to think about this is that we have so long used our fingers in a slightly bow-legged fashion that now it is necessary for us to compensate or develop the ability to be knock-kneed a little bit, so that we will eventually be able to stand up straight with those 2 fingers rather than bow-legged. We have to overcompensate by building up the adductive muscles. Now, you can progress down the neck, fret by fret, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, again taking a few seconds. I'm foreshortening the time here. A few seconds on each one. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4, relax, 2, 3, 4, next string, 1, 2, 3, 4, relax, and so on. When you can come down here at the 1st fret and play 2 and 4 there with good adduction and without excessive abduction, you will find that you can proceed, maybe after a few days or a week, to coming up to the higher frets and playing at a whole tone with that adduction. Sometimes people go up very high on the instrument, depending on whether they have a cutaway or what kind of guitar they're playing, where it feels comfortable. Here I am adducting at a whole tone. I can develop that ability gradually, move it down the neck slowly, fret by fret, day by day, trying to go maybe 1 more fret a day, giving myself a couple of weeks to get down here, whatever is necessary. And when I can do this whole tone with good balance and adduction, not this way, but rather that way, I can proceed up the neck again and try to play a minor third and still balance the same way, trying to avoid this and get a balance that squeezes towards center and therefore centers the weight of my arm and the weight of my hand underneath the position I'm playing in. I can proceed down the neck with that. And gradually increase